Now we're going to start a lecture called The Digital Child. I always like to throw this in because I don't think that we can study child development in today's world without looking at the effects of technology on children. They are growing up around it, they are immersed in it. We have to consider it. So first off, we're going to start with the risks of being exposed to technology in the media. So some concerns about technology is the amount of screen time. Almost as soon as television was invented, parents and medical professionals had concerns. The amount of time children spend in front of a screen has skyrocketed, leading to concerns about the effects on children's minds and bodies. So children under 2 spend about 42 minutes a day, which means about 5 hours a week on a screen, on average. Between ages 2 to 4, they spend almost 19 hours a week. That's about 2 hours and 40 minutes a day. And ages 5 to 8 spend about 3 hours a day. That's 21 hours a week. Okay, let's see if this link works. So here's a chart of media use. Okay, so the blue bars are 2 to 11 years old, and the black bars are 12 to 17 years old. And they have it divided by type of media. This was back in 2017. So this is the weekly time spent in minutes. So you can see how much children spend on TV, okay, listening to the radio. Notice young children aren't here at all. Internet via a desktop or a laptop, multimedia device, game consoles, video via desktop or laptop, or a DVD Blu-ray device. So you can see here that children spend a lot of minutes per week on media, especially if you take all of these bars and add them up. So a lot of studies have been done on this. Concerns have led to hundreds of studies investigating links between media consumption and emotional, cognitive, and moral development. Concerns lead to studies. The claims that these studies find usually get exaggerated and sensationalized. This leads to more concerns, which leads to more studies, and that's why we see so many studies on this topic. But in truth, the studies are mixed. We have mixed results. Studies have added to the debate on these issues, but they've also raised a lot of questions about the methodology and limitations on this correlational psychological research. So some studies suggest that media is good, some suggest that it's bad, but it's really mixed because not all studies seem to be effective or created equal. So media and attention. The question is, do TV and video games affect the ability to pay attention and restrain impulses? One study looked at one aspect of how children learn, the ability to pay attention and restrain their impulses. This is selective attention. It's really important in school and learning. The study wanted to know if watching TV and playing video games affected attention. So the study compared school performance and media habits. So this was a correlational study. Compared school and homework performance with media habits in grades 3 to 5, and then in a separate study they looked at adolescents. Parents helped their kids log their TV and gaming time over the course of 13 months. Their teachers were interviewed to obtain assessments of the child's classroom performance. So the findings here. They found that attention problems grew worse in proportion to the total time kids spent in front of the screen. So the more time kids were in front of the screen, the worse their attention skills. Kids who exceed 2 hours per day are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to have attention problems. The findings in adolescent study were similar. So why? The speculation was that the action in most TV and video games moves very quickly, involving rapid changes of focus, so slower activities become harder to stay focused on. In a way, children become so used to things that move quickly, they have a harder time paying attention to things that move more slowly. So there were some critiques of this study. An association was made between media use and attention, but remember, correlation does not prove causation. Poor concentration is also associated with lack of sleep and exercise, which may also result from too much screen time. So is it the screen time itself that's causing attention problems, or are there other factors going on? So next, media and aggression. You hear about this a lot. Every time there is a big aggressive act from teenagers or children, video games and TV are blamed. So first off, let's understand the difference between aggression and violence. The term aggression refers to a range of behaviors that can result in physical and psychological harm to yourself, others, or objects in the environment. This type of behavior centers on harming another person either physically or mentally. So social psychologists use the term violence to refer to aggression that has extreme physical harm, such as injury or death, as its goal. So violence is a type of aggression. Okay. All violent acts are aggressive, but only acts that are intended to cause extreme physical damage are violent. So slapping someone really hard across the face might be violent, but calling people names would only be aggressive. Okay. So when we're talking about aggression, I wanted you to understand what I meant. So remember, Bandura did studies on the effects of media and aggression. Remember, he found that if children observed a character or a person acting aggressive, they would copy it. So right when TV was invented, these studies have been done, and studies like Bandura's found that there is an association. There are factors that fuel this debate. Okay, 2 factors fuel the debate about whether watching violence on media directly causes an increase in aggressive acts committed by children and adolescents. So these 2 factors are the increasing popularity of violent video games on top of watching TV and the increased rates of acts of violence committed by youth. So there are more and more violent video games out there, more kids are playing them, and we see more and more children and adolescents committing acts of violence. So these 2 factors have led to this big debate. Again, hundreds of studies have been done, laboratory studies and longitudinal studies based on contextual evidence. One longitudinal study that ended in the year 2000 found a connection between watching TV and aggressive behavior. So it did say that TV and aggression were linked. However, the association between watching violence and committing acts of violence is strong but indirect. The implication of this study is that the effect of TV violence is not short-term and limited to child's behavior. It may last until adulthood. So studies have found links between TV and aggression. But were there confounding variables? Were there confounding factors? Maybe families high in TV viewing are lower in character and moral development. Maybe there are other factors involved. Again, correlation does not prove causation. Okay, there might be other factors involved. Maybe children who are watching more TV just happen to be more violent or aggressive. But there are effects of seeing violence. Most health professionals agree. Okay. The American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry agree on the following points. Children who see a lot of violence are more likely to view violence as an effective and acceptable strategy to settle conflict. So children who see violence are more likely to see that as a tool to settle conflicts and more likely to use it. They are less likely to take action. Viewing violence can decrease the likelihood that someone will take action on behalf of a victim in a violent situation. And they'll be more violent themselves. Children exposed to violent programming at a young age are more likely to be violent themselves later in life. So this seems to be a consensus of seeing violence. So let's take that to violent video games. Okay? Are violent video games connected with aggressive behavior? Playing violent video games does increase aggressive thoughts and behavior in a laboratory setting. It's also connected with a history of juvenile delinquency. Males are more likely than females to act aggressively after playing video games and more likely to view the world as a hostile place. We've already talked about how males and females tend to view aggression differently. Students who get higher grades are less likely to behave aggressively after violent video games. So what does this all mean? Does it mean that the violent video games are causing aggressive behavior, or are there other factors involved? Do video games cause violence? This is something you have to think about. So there are some caveats and mitigating factors. Cultural and sex differences. Cultural and/or biological sex differences and moderating variables such as academic achievement come into play. Again, children who get higher grades are less likely to be aggressive after playing a violent video game. So there's something going on. There are other factors involved. There's a circular relationship. Children do not automatically imitate violence they view in the media, but there may be a circular relationship between exposure to media violence and aggressive behavior. For instance, violent media contributes to aggressive behavior, but aggressive children are more likely to seek out aggressive media. So it kind of forms a circle. Does one cause the other, or are they just happening at the same time? And then there are family factors. Parental substance abuse, paternal physical punishments, and single motherhood contribute to the likelihood of aggression in early childhood. So these other factors have been identified as predictors of aggression in early childhood. Parental rejection also increases the likelihood of aggression. So in these situations, in these bad family situations, are those children who are already going to be more aggressive more likely to spend a lot of time watching television or playing video games? Remember, just because something's correlated doesn't mean we can make a direct relationship. So, some possible causes of media causing aggression. Observational learning. This is what Bandura found. Children imitate what they see. So, media violence supplies models of aggressive behavior and skills that children may acquire. Disinhibition. Media violence may disinhibit aggressive behavior. Remember, inhibition is the ability to push something down, to ignore it, especially when the characters get away with violence or rewarded for it. So punishment inhibits behavior. So if the characters aren't punished, they're likely to have their behavior encouraged, and people watching that happen of a secondary reinforcement. And increased arousal. So I don't mean sexual arousal, I mean mental arousal. Media violence and aggressive video games increase viewers' level of mental arousal. Television works them up. This isn't just violent TV. Any screen time stimulates the brain. Have you ever seen children bouncing off the wall after watching a lot of TV? This is also why you shouldn't have screen time right before bed. Screen time stimulates the brain. We are more likely to be aggressive when we're in this state of arousal. The priming of aggressive thoughts. Media violence primes or arouses aggressive ideas and memories. And habituation or desensitization. We become used to repeated stimuli. Ever stop hearing a noise or stop paying attention to something that you see every day? Repeated exposure to media violence may decrease sensitivity to real violence. This is called desensitization. This is the result of repeated exposure to something that lessens a person's cognitive, affective, and behavioral responses to that stimulus. So one study looked at real-life violence witnessed, violence exposure from the media, empathy, and attitudes towards violence. They found that only movie and video game violence exposure were associated with strong pro-violence attitudes and lower empathy. So although children who play large amounts of violent video games may be slightly more aggressive, they are not necessarily more violent than children who do not. Researchers speculate that the necessity of choosing violent strategies in video games in order to win provides positive reinforcement to existing pro-violence strategies and attitudes. So maybe the video games are just encouraging what's already there, not causing it. So, based on what we've just discussed, what do you think about the relationship between media and aggression? Okay. So often when a child commits a violent crime, video games are blamed. So what do you think? I'm going to post this online and I want to hear what you think about this.